When Lorenzo Moretti opened his door to a rain-soaked stranger that November night, he had no idea he was letting in the woman who would drag him back into the darkness he had spent 6 months running from, and then show him a light he never believed he deserved. He was a mafia boss in hiding, a man whose hands had spilled enough blood to drown his own soul, learning to be nothing more than a mechanic and a father to a 6-year-old girl who didn't know monsters were real. She was a broken woman with bruises on her skin, and a $150,000 debt to the kind of men who sold human beings like cattle, running from a fate worse than death. One act of mercy from a man who had forgotten what mercy meant. One knock on a door from a woman who had nowhere left to go. It would cost them everything they had, and give them everything they never dared to dream. This is their story. Stay until the end and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. Drop a like if you believe in second chances, and comment your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The door opened, and nothing would ever be the same. The knock came at 9:47 in the evening, cutting through Lorenzo's low voice as he reached the final page of the fairy tale Mia loved most. The 6-year-old girl lay curled beside him, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Yet her small hand still clutched the stuffed bear named Mr. Theo as if someone might steal it away in her dreams. Lorenzo stopped mid-sentence, his body going rigid with the instinct of a man who had lived too long in a world where a knock at night often meant death. 6 months. 6 months he had lived in this shabby little house on the outskirts of Portland, fixing cars by day, reading stories to his daughter by night, trying to forget the fallen empire and the bodies he had stepped over to get here. 6 months he had believed he was safe. Lorenzo gently set the book aside, pulled the blanket up around Mia, then rose without a sound. He opened the bedside drawer and took out the pistol that had been with him for 15 years in the life. The cold weight of metal in his palm was painfully familiar. He had promised himself he would never touch it again, but promises were a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Lorenzo left Mia's room, closed the door softly, and moved down the stairs without a sound. Outside, rain was pouring as if the sky meant to drown the world. The knock came again, weaker this time, as though whoever stood there was running out of strength. Lorenzo pressed his back to the wall beside the door, raised the gun to his chest, and leaned in to look through the peephole. His heart missed a beat. Not a Castellano assassin, not the police, not anyone from the list of people who wanted him dead. It was a girl, young, maybe in her early 20s, standing there trembling under the porch with rain-soaked clothes clinging to her body. But what held Lorenzo's gaze wasn't her slender frame or her tangled black hair. It was her face. One cheek was swollen and bruised purple. Her lower lip was split, dried blood dark against her skin. Red marks ringed her neck as if someone had tried to choke her not long ago. Lorenzo had seen enough injuries in his life to know these weren't from an accident. These were wounds made by human hands, by someone who wanted to hurt, to break, to own. He should turn away. He knew that. Opening the door to a stranger was suicide in his world. This girl could be a trap, bait, a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Then she lifted her face, as if she sensed someone watching from behind the door, and Lorenzo saw her eyes. The eyes of an animal driven into a corner, with nowhere left to run and no one left to beg. Eyes he had seen in the mirror for 6 months. Eyes he saw in Mia's face whenever she asked why her mother never came back. Lorenzo lowered the gun. He slid it into the back of his waistband and reached for the door. Cold wind and rain slammed into his face, but he didn't blink. The girl looked at him, fear and hope tangled together in her gaze, as if she didn't know whether he would save her or push her back into the hell outside. Lorenzo said nothing for several seconds, just stood there looking at her, at the injuries, at the way she clutched her backpack to her chest as if it were the last thing she had left in the world. Then he did something Lorenzo Moretti of 6 months ago would never have done. He stepped aside, opened the door wide, and spoke in a rough, low voice, unused to talking to anyone but a 6-year-old child. "Come in. Before you freeze to death out there." The girl stared at him as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard, as if she had braced herself for the door to be slammed shut in her face, rather than an invitation from a stranger on a rainy night. She hesitated for a second, then stepped over the threshold on legs, trembling so badly that Lorenzo thought she might collapse right there. Rainwater dripped onto the worn wooden floor, pooling around her feet, and Lorenzo noticed how hard she was trying to keep her teeth from chattering when she spoke. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold, or from crying too much, or both. "I didn't mean to bother anyone. I just needed somewhere to wait out the rain for a bit. My phone died, and I got lost, and my friend drove off and left me at a gas station a few miles away, because we argued about her boyfriend and I walked, and I saw your lights on, so I thought." She stopped, drew in a shaky breath, and Lorenzo realized she was lying. Not all of it. Maybe being left behind was true. but the rest was a story hastily stitched together by someone too frightened to invent something better. He had interrogated enough people in his life to know when someone was hiding something. The way her eyes dropped when she spoke, the way her hands clenched the straps of her backpack as if it held something she would die to protect, the way she instinctively leaned away from him, even though he hadn't moved closer. The injuries on her face weren't from an argument between friends. They were the marks of someone who had been beaten methodically, deliberately, by a person who knew how to inflict pain without leaving obvious traces. But Lorenzo didn't ask. He had no right to, because he too was living behind a massive lie. Because this house, the name of mechanic, this fabricated peaceful life, were all just a shell hiding the monster underneath. "I'm Scarlett," the girl added, as if she had just realized she hadn't introduced herself. "Scarlett Hayes." Lorenzo nodded, offering no name of his own, and walked to the hall closet to take out a towel and a set of his old clothes. "The bathroom's at the end of the hall on the right," he said curtly. "Change, then we'll talk later. Warm up first." Scarlett took the clothes, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment, and Lorenzo saw something there that unsettled him. Not fear, but gratitude. The desperate gratitude of someone who hadn't been treated kindly in far too long. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say. I'll leave as soon as the rain lets up. I promise I won't." "Go change," Lorenzo cut in, his voice colder than he intended. "You're shaking." Scarlett nodded and hurried down the hall, leaving Lorenzo alone in the living room with hundreds of questions crowding his mind and the gun still warm against his back. What the hell was he doing? Letting a stranger into his house, where his daughter was sleeping, where he was hiding from people who would kill his entire family to reclaim a fallen empire. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake, but when he had seen the girl standing in the rain, he couldn't stop thinking about Mia. About how, 15 years from now, if his daughter for some reason had to run through the rain at night, knocking on a stranger's door with a bruised face and desperate eyes, how he would want her to be treated. "Dad?" The small voice from the staircase made Lorenzo spin around. Mia stood on the top step clutching Mr. Theo, her eyes still heavy with sleep but wide with curiosity. "Who are you talking to?" "I heard a stranger." Lorenzo sighed and walked to the bottom of the stairs. "There's a girl who got caught in the rain, sweetheart. She needs a place to stay for a bit." "Is she staying with us, Dad?" Mia asked, tilting her head like a curious little sparrow. "Is she pretty? Does she like drawing? Does she like Mr. Theo?" Before Lorenzo could answer any of the questions, the bathroom door opened, and Scarlett stepped out wearing his oversized sweater and sweatpants, her wet hair still dripping, her face a little less pale. She looked up at the stairs and froze when she saw Mia. And Mia, a 6-year-old who didn't yet know what it meant to fear strangers, broke into a wide grin and waved. "Hi, what's your name? Do you want to see my drawings?" Scarlett woke when the first light of morning slipped through the worn curtains in the living room, and it took her a few seconds to remember where she was. The old but comfortable sofa, the wool blanket that smelled of clean laundry, the small house, strangely quiet after so many nights of sleeping in fear, flinching at every sound. She sat up, her body aching from wounds that hadn't yet healed, and looked around the room in the daylight, simple, modest. Nothing suggested who the man living here really was beyond a single father who fixed cars for a living. But Scarlett had learned not to trust appearances. She stood, folded the blanket neatly, and began packing her backpack. She couldn't stay here. She had no right to drag strangers into the chaos of her life, especially when that stranger had a small daughter with a clear, bright smile and eyes that had never known how cruel the world could be. Victor would find her. He always did. And when that happened, anyone standing beside her would become a target. Scarlett was tying the straps of her backpack when the sound of tiny feet running down the stairs froze her in place. Miss Scarlett. Mia appeared in princess pajamas, her hair a tangled nest after a deep sleep. Mr. Theo clutched tightly in her arms. "Where are you going? Aren't you staying to have breakfast with me? My dad makes really good pancakes. He even lets me have extra chocolate chips even though he says chocolate's bad for your teeth." Scarlett felt her heart tighten. She wasn't used to this warmth, not used to someone wanting her to stay. She had lived too long in a world where people only wanted to take something from her, and the sincerity in the eyes of this 6-year-old child left her unsure how to respond. "I have to go." "Sweetheart," Scarlett tried to smile, but she knew it looked strained and crooked. "I have things to do, but you promised you'd look at my drawings yesterday," Mia said, her voice beginning to tremble as if she were about to cry. "You promised. Grown-ups can't break promises. My dad says so." Before Scarlett could answer, Lorenzo appeared in the kitchen doorway, a spatula in his hand and a sharp gaze fixed on her in a way that made her feel seen straight through. "Mia, go into the kitchen," he said, his voice softer when speaking to his daughter. "The pancakes are almost ready. I left your chocolate chips on the table." Mia glanced back at Scarlett, her wide eyes full of hope, then ran into the kitchen after tugging lightly at her hand as if afraid she'd disappear the moment she let go. Lorenzo waited until his daughter vanished behind the kitchen door before turning back to Scarlett. "Where are you going?" "I can't stay here," Scarlett said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I've bothered you enough. Thank you for last night, but I have to go." "Go where?" Lorenzo asked. And the simplicity of the question left Scarlett silent. Because she didn't know. She had no home to return to, no family to turn to, no money, no phone, nothing but a backpack with a few clothes and a photograph of her younger brother who had passed away. Lorenzo studied her in silence for a moment, then spoke without emotion. "Sit down and eat breakfast. You can't go anywhere on an empty stomach looking like that." He turned and walked back into the kitchen before Scarlett could object, leaving her standing there unsure whether she should feel grateful or afraid of this strange man. 20 minutes later, while Scarlett sat at the table watching Mia color her pancake with strawberry syrup and listening to her chatter about Mr. Theo and dream adventures, Lorenzo quietly stepped out onto the back porch and made a call. "Enzo," he said when the other end picked up, "I need you to look into someone. Scarlett Hayes. Around 27 years old. Find everything you can. And fast." He hung up and looked through the glass door into the house, where Scarlett was smiling at Mia, the first smile he'd seen on her face, and he wondered what he was doing. 2 hours later, Enzo called back, and what he said made the blood in Lorenzo's veins turn cold. Scarlett Hayes, 27, orphaned. She had a younger brother who died of leukemia 3 months ago. She owes $150,000 in hospital bills and loan shark debt. The creditor is Victor Haynes. Lorenzo stopped breathing. Victor Haynes. The name hit him like a bucket of ice water. "Are you sure?" "100% sure," Enzo replied, his voice tense. "And there's more. Victor Haynes is a low-level operative for Romano Castellano. He runs loan shark operations and supplies girls to Castellano's network. Looks like this girl ran when Victor tried to sell her to clear the debt." Lorenzo ended the call, stood still on the porch, and stared into the house where Scarlett was helping Mia wipe syrup from her face. The girl running from the men of the enemy who had slaughtered nearly all of his people, the enemy hunting him across the country, had knocked on his door last night. Was this coincidence or a trap? And if it was a trap, why couldn't he bring himself to send her away? Lorenzo waited until Mia had fallen asleep for her afternoon nap before looking for Scarlett. She was sitting on the back porch steps, staring out at the small yard with its old wooden fence, her posture curled inward like a wounded sparrow, trying to make itself small enough not to be seen. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and Lorenzo realized she had been crying. Tear stains still marked her cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away, as if she was too exhausted to pretend she was strong anymore. "I know you want me to leave," Scarlett said before Lorenzo could speak. "I'll go right now. Thank you for everything." Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He sat down on the step beside her, keeping just enough distance not to invade her space, and looked out at the yard the way she had. "You owe Victor Haynes $150,000, he said, not as a question but a statement. Scarlett stiffened. She turned to him, eyes wide with fear and panic, and Lorenzo could see her calculating whether she should run or try to explain. "How do you know that?" "I have my ways," Lorenzo replied calmly. "And I also know who Victor Haynes works for." He looked straight into her eyes and saw the moment she realized he wasn't just an ordinary mechanic. Fear flickered across her face, then was replaced by something like acceptance, as if she was used to things being worse than she imagined. "Who are you?" Scarlett asked, her voice trembling but not retreating. "I'm someone who's hiding, just like you," Lorenzo said. "And I have reasons to hate the people Victor Haynes works for. That's all you need to know for now." Silence stretched between them. The wind moved through the wooden fence. Birds sang somewhere in a neighbor's yard. The world kept turning while two strangers sat side by side carrying secrets heavier than their bodies. "I have a proposal," Lorenzo said at last. "You stay here. You help watch Mia while I'm at work. In return, you have a safe place to live, food on the table, and no one will find you here." Scarlett looked at him as if he had started speaking a foreign language. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "Because my daughter likes you," Lorenzo said, and that was part of the truth. "She doesn't have a mother. She needs a woman around. And because if Victor finds you, he'll question you about where you've been, and I don't want anyone knowing this place exists." Scarlett understood immediately. "You're protecting yourself, not me." "I'm protecting my daughter," Lorenzo replied. "You just happen to benefit." Another pause followed. Then Scarlett asked, her voice cautious as if she were stepping onto thin ice. "What are the rules?" "You sleep in the living room. You don't ask about my past. I don't ask about yours. No one goes out alone after dark. No one knows you live here. And if there's any sign Victor's people are getting close, you tell me immediately." Lorenzo stopped and looked straight into her eyes. "You can leave any time you want. I don't keep anyone here by force. But if you stay, you follow my rules. No exceptions." Scarlett looked down at her hands, thin fingers marked with calluses from years of hard work, and Lorenzo wondered what she was thinking, weighing whether he could be trusted, wondering if this was just another trap in the long chain of traps life had set for her. "All right," she said at last, her voice soft but steady. "I'll stay." Lorenzo nodded, stood up, and went back into the house without another word. But as he stood in the kitchen, looking out the window at Scarlett still sitting there facing the yard, he wondered what he had just done. He had let a stranger step into his life, into Mia's life, and he didn't know whether it was the smartest decision he had ever made or the stupidest one. The first week passed like a strange dream none of them quite dared to believe was real. On the first day, Scarlett stayed curled into the corner of the sofa, trying to take up as little space as possible, eating as if someone might snatch the plate from her hands at any moment. On the second day, Mia dragged her into the bedroom to show off her collection of messy drawings, and Scarlett sat there for hours listening as the child explained every picture with a patience Lorenzo had never seen in anyone before. On the third day, Scarlett asked Lorenzo if she could buy some boxes of crayons and drawing paper for Mia, and he realized it was the first time she had asked for anything at all since arriving, even though it wasn't for herself. He bought a full set of art supplies on his way home from the garage, and the way Mia's eyes lit up at the sight of the new colors stirred something in him he had forgotten long ago. On the fourth day, Lorenzo came home earlier than usual and stood outside the living room without letting anyone know he was there. Scarlett was sitting on the floor with Mia, their heads bent together, one dark, one brown, working on a drawing. She showed Mia how to mix colors, how to add shadows, how to turn clumsy lines into shapes with meaning. And her voice when she spoke to the child was so gentle it felt like a lullaby drifting through the room. "You draw beautifully, Mia," Scarlett said. "You have the eye of a real artist." "Really, Miss Scar?" Mia looked up, eyes shining. "You're an artist too, aren't you?" "I used to be," Scarlett replied, and Lorenzo heard the sadness in her voice even as she tried to hide it. "I studied art in college once. Why did you stop?" "Because life had other plans for me, sweetheart," Scarlett said, then quickly changed the subject. "But it's all right. Now I can teach you how to draw. That's still being an artist, isn't it?" Lorenzo stepped back before he was noticed, but the image stayed with him. The way Scarlett looked at Mia, the way she smiled at her, the first real smile he had seen since that night in the rain. The way Mia leaned into her as if she had always been there, as if she belonged. On the fifth day, Scarlett offered to cook dinner. Lorenzo wanted to refuse because she was a guest, not help, but Mia cheered in agreement before he could speak. That evening, for the first time in 6 months, the small kitchen filled with the smell of home-cooked food instead of takeout. Scarlett made a simple pasta with tomato sauce and ground meat, nothing fancy. But when Lorenzo sat down and looked at the steaming plate in front of him, he realized it was the first family meal he had had since Victoria left. Mia chattered through the entire dinner about the pictures she wanted to draw, about Mr. Theo and his imaginary adventures, about Miss Scar and how she could make green from blue and yellow like magic. Scarlett listened, adding a comment now and then, and Lorenzo noticed how quiet she was around him, but how different she became with Mia. More relaxed, more natural, more alive. On the 6th day, it rained, and Mia insisted on watching a cartoon. The three of them sat on the sofa, Mia in the middle, and halfway through the movie she fell asleep with her head resting on Scarlett's shoulder. Lorenzo glanced over and caught Scarlett looking at him. In that moment, neither of them spoke, but something shifted in the air between them, as if the invisible wall they had both built was starting to crack. "Thank you," Lorenzo said softly so he wouldn't wake Mia, "for taking care of her." Scarlett looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, and when she looked back up, her eyes were shining. "Thank you for giving me the chance to take care of someone," she replied. "It's been a long time since I've had that." And Lorenzo understood. He understood because it had been the same for him. It had been a long time since he had anyone to protect besides Mia. A long time since he had a reason to come home early. A long time since this house had held the laughter of more than one person. On the 7th day, Lorenzo woke up and realized he hadn't thought about Castellano, about Victoria, about the lost empire for 24 hours straight. He didn't know whether that was a good thing or something to fear. That night, Lorenzo couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, his mind spinning with thoughts he couldn't quiet. About Scarlett, about the way she looked at Mia, about how he had begun to look forward to coming home instead of treating it like an obligation, about how he was breaking every rule he had ever set for survival. Close to 2 a.m, he heard the back door open softly. Lorenzo was alert at once, the instincts of a man who had lived too long in danger pushing him to reach for the gun beneath his pillow before he stepped out of the room. But when he looked through the hallway window, he saw Scarlett sitting alone on the back porch steps, her shoulders shaking under the cold moonlight of a late November night. She was crying, not loud, broken sobs, but the quiet kind of crying of someone who had learned too well how to hide pain, the kind of crying Lorenzo knew intimately, because he had heard it from himself during the first nights after he ran, when he held Mia while she slept and wondered if he was doing the right thing. He should have gone back to his room. He should have pretended he saw nothing. He should have kept the distance they had both agreed on. Instead, Lorenzo found himself opening the door and stepping onto the porch with empty hands, then sitting down on the step beside her. Scarlett startled and quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick. "I didn't want to wake anyone. I just needed some air." "You don't need to apologize," Lorenzo replied. "This is your home too now. If you need to cry, then cry." Silence followed. Crickets somewhere in the bushes, wind moving through the branches of the old oak at the edge of the yard. Then Scarlett spoke, her voice so soft Lorenzo had to lean closer to hear her. "Today is my brother's birthday." She looked down at her hands. His name was Jamie Hayes. He would have turned 23 today if he were still alive. Lorenzo didn't speak. He just sat there and listened. And maybe that was exactly what Scarlett needed. Not empty comfort. Not pity. Just someone sitting beside her in the dark, allowing her to hurt. "He had leukemia," Scarlett continued, staring out at the black yard. "Diagnosed when he was 19. 4 years, Lorenzo. 4 years watching my little brother waste away day by day. 4 years working 3 jobs at once to pay hospital bills. 4 years praying every night even though I didn't believe anyone was listening. And then he died, 3 months ago. He died while I was serving drinks at a cheap bar because I didn't have the money to be with him in his final hours." Her voice broke, and she cried for real now, the kind of sobbing that came from deep inside her chest. Lorenzo didn't think. He just acted on instinct, reaching out and placing his hand on her back. He didn't pull her closer. He didn't hold her. It was just a warm anchor in the cold night. And Scarlett didn't pull away. "I borrowed money from Victor to pay for the last round of chemotherapy," she said between sobs. "I thought if Jamie survived, I'd find a way to pay it back. But he didn't, and now I owe men who want to turn me into something to be sold, and I have no one left. No one in this world, Lorenzo. I'm completely alone." She turned to look at him, her eyes red and swollen, and Lorenzo found himself speaking before he could stop himself. "You're not alone. You have Mia, and you have me." Scarlett stared at him as if he had said something impossible. "Why?" she asked again, the same question she had asked from the first day. "Why are you helping me? Who are you really?" Lorenzo was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice low and weary, like a man who had carried too much for too long. "I used to be a very cruel man, Scarlett. I've done things that if you knew them, you'd take Mia and run from this house immediately. I've killed people. I've destroyed lives. I built an empire on blood and tears. Then that empire collapsed. The people I trusted betrayed me. My wife sold me out to my enemies. And I had to run in the middle of the night with my daughter in my arms while my people died around me." Scarlett said nothing. She didn't pull away. She didn't move back. She just sat there and listened, the way he had listened to her. "I'm not helping you because I'm a good man," Lorenzo continued. "I'm helping you because when I saw you standing in the rain that night, I saw myself, someone running with nowhere left to go. And I thought that if someone had opened a door for me when I needed it most, maybe I wouldn't have become the monster I am today." They sat in silence for a long time, 2 figures leaning toward each other in the dark, and when Scarlett rested her head on his shoulder, Lorenzo didn't push her away. He let her stay there, felt her warmth through the fabric of his shirt, and wondered whether this was the end of something or the beginning of something he didn't dare name. 3 weeks had passed since the night they sat on the porch and shared their wounds, and Lorenzo realized his life had changed in ways he never anticipated. The house was no longer silent the way it had been before. Mornings carried the sound of Scarlett laughing with Mia in the kitchen. Afternoons held soft music from the old radio, while the two of them drew together. Evenings brought the smell of hot food and the low murmur of conversation around the table. Lorenzo started coming home earlier, even though no one asked him to. He started finding excuses to linger in the kitchen instead of retreating to his room like he had during the first weeks. He started realizing he was searching for Scarlett's eyes in every room he entered. He hated it. He hated the way his heart sped up when their hands brushed by accident. He hated lying awake at night thinking about her smile. He hated how he was letting a woman step past the walls he had built after Victoria betrayed him. Victoria had once made him feel this way too. She had once made him believe he could have a normal happiness like other men, and then she sold him out, sold Mia out, to his enemies for money and power. Lorenzo had sworn he would never trust anyone again, never let anyone close enough to stab him in the back. And yet, what was he doing now? Opening his home to a stranger, letting her into Mia's life, telling her secrets he had never spoken aloud to anyone. It came to a head on a Sunday afternoon, when Lorenzo came home earlier than planned because the garage was closed. He was standing outside fumbling for his keys when he heard Mia's voice drifting from inside. "Mama Scar, can I draw more butterflies in this corner?" Lorenzo froze in place. "Mama Scar, not Miss Scar. Mama Scar," he heard Scarlett laugh. "Of course you can, my little princess. What color butterflies do you want?" "Purple," Mia answered, "because purple is Mama Scar's favorite color. I want Mama Scar to like this picture." Lorenzo stood there, gripping his keys so tightly his knuckles went white. Mia was calling Scarlett Mama. His daughter, the child who had never called anyone mother since Victoria left, had just given that name to a woman who had been a stranger weeks ago. He should have felt happy. He should have felt grateful that Mia finally had a mother figure in her life. Instead, panic flooded him, because this meant Mia was attached. It meant that if Scarlett left, if she betrayed them, if Victor found her and took her away, Mia would lose her mother a second time, and this time it might destroy her completely. Lorenzo went inside, and both Scarlett and Mia looked up at him with bright smiles. "Dad's home!" Mia cried, running to hug his legs. "Look, Dad." "Mama Scar and I drew butterflies. Aren't they pretty?" Lorenzo looked down at his daughter, then up at Scarlett, and he saw the worry in her eyes, as if she knew he had heard, as if she was waiting for him to be angry. But Lorenzo wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of resisting. Tired of keeping his distance. Tired of trying to protect his heart when it had already belonged to someone else for longer than he cared to admit. "They're beautiful, Princess," he told Mia, his voice gentler than he intended. "I love them." Then he looked at Scarlett, and in the way their eyes met there were 1,000 things neither of them dared say. That night, after Mia had gone to sleep, Lorenzo called Enzo. "I need you to keep a closer watch on the house," he said. "There are 2 people I need to protect now." When he ended the call, Lorenzo looked out the window at the light still glowing in the living room, where Scarlett sat reading on the sofa that had become her bed, and he admitted to himself what he had been denying for 3 weeks. He was in love with her, and that frightened him more than 100 of Castellano's gunmen ever could. Scarlett started working at a small cafe 2 blocks from Lorenzo's house in the 4th week. Lorenzo didn't want her to work, telling her she didn't need money while she was here, but Scarlett refused firmly. "I can't live off you forever," she said. And Lorenzo understood this was about dignity, about her holding on to a piece of herself after losing almost everything. So he asked Enzo to arrange things, making sure the cafe was clean, unconnected to the underworld, and placed someone to watch from a distance and report any sign of trouble. The first 3 days were peaceful. Scarlett went to work in the mornings, came home in the afternoons to pick up Mia from school, and Lorenzo from the garage, and the 3 of them ate dinner together like a real family. Lorenzo began to let himself believe that maybe they truly were safe, that Victor had given up, that the past would never find them in this quiet corner of Portland. He was wrong. On the 4th day, Lorenzo was repairing an old truck in the garage when his phone vibrated. A message from Enzo's watcher. 3 words. "There's trouble." Lorenzo didn't need to read anything else. He dropped the wrench, wiped his hands on a greasy rag, and ran for his car. His heart hammered in his chest the entire drive to the cafe, his mind spinning through 100 worst-case scenarios. When he pulled up in front of the cafe, he saw it immediately. A sleek black car parked right out front, the kind only men from that world drove. And inside the cafe, through the large glass window, Lorenzo saw Scarlett being pinned against a corner wall by a large man, while 2 lackeys blocked the door. Victor Haynes. Lorenzo recognized him from the photos Enzo had sent. Balding forehead, narrow eyes, a bear-like build stuffed into a cheap suit stretched tight across the shoulders. The face of a man used to inflicting pain and enjoying it. Lorenzo stepped out of the car, and he could hear Victor's voice carrying through the open door. You think you can run from me, you little bitch, Victor snarled, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. You owe me $150,000. You're my property. You don't go anywhere without my permission. I'll pay you back, Scarlett said, her voice shaking but struggling to stay calm. I'm working. I'll pay every cent. Just give me more time. Victor laughed, a cold sound without a trace of humor. Time? You've been hiding for 3 weeks. You know how much money you've cost me. You know who I promised you to. He stepped closer, and Lorenzo saw Scarlett retreat until her back hit the wall. You'll pay another way, Victor said, his voice dropping to a snake-like hiss. You'll do exactly what I tell you. And if you try to run again, I won't just come for you. I'll come for anyone who helped you. And I'll show you what happens to people who get in my way. Scarlett didn't answer, just stood there with fear filling her eyes, and Lorenzo saw her glance toward the door as if praying someone would come save her. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Victor roared. Then, without waiting for her reaction, he swung his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound cracked through the room like a whip, and Scarlett fell to the floor, clutching her cheek, blood seeping from her lip where it had split open again. Lorenzo didn't remember walking into the cafe. He only knew that 1 second he had been outside. The next he was standing in the middle of the room, and the monster he had tried to bury for 6 months was roaring in his chest, demanding to be unleashed. Hey, Lorenzo said, his voice ice-cold and terrifyingly calm. Step away from her. Victor turned, and when he saw Lorenzo, he sneered. Oh, look at this. A hero. Who are you? Her new boyfriend? Lorenzo didn't answer. He just stood there, arms loose at his sides, but his eyes were measuring distance, calculating angles, preparing for what he was about to do. Victor's 2 men moved closer, but Victor signaled them to stop. He wanted to handle this himself. Listen up, mechanic, Victor said, eyeing Lorenzo's oil-stained clothes. This isn't your business. The girl owes me money. I'm just collecting a debt. You walk away now, and I'll forget you were ever here. She doesn't owe anyone anything, Lorenzo said. She belongs to me now. Victor narrowed his eyes, and for the first time a flicker of doubt crossed his face. What did you just say? I said. Lorenzo stepped forward 1 pace, and something in the way he moved made the entire room seem to freeze. She belongs to me, and if you touch her again, I'll cut off every one of your fingers and shove them down your throat. Victor's face flushed with rage, and he swung to punch Lorenzo the same way he had slapped Scarlett. But Lorenzo wasn't Scarlett. Lorenzo was a man trained to kill since the age of 16, a man who had climbed to the top of a Mafia empire through blood and violence, a man even the most notorious hitmen wouldn't meet eye to eye. Victor's punch never landed. Lorenzo slipped aside, his left hand blocking Victor's arm as his right fist drove straight into Victor's throat. 1 strike. Just 1. Victor collapsed to the floor like a sack of sand, clutching his neck, his face turning purple as he struggled to breathe. The 2 lackeys drew their guns but froze when they saw Lorenzo's eyes. Those weren't the eyes of a mechanic. Those were the eyes of a man who had killed more people than they had ever met, and they knew if they fired, they would be dead before the bullet left the barrel. Take your trash and go, Lorenzo said without emotion, and tell Victor, when he wakes up, that if I ever see his face in Portland again, I'll send his head to Castellano in a gift box. The 2 men went pale at the mention of Castellano, and Lorenzo knew they were wondering how a mechanic could know that name. They didn't ask. They hauled Victor to his feet, dragged him to the car, and drove off without looking back. Lorenzo turned to Scarlett, and when he saw her slumped against the wall with blood on her lip and tears on her cheeks, the rage drained from him, replaced by a pain that cut deep. He knelt in front of her, gently lifting her chin to check her injuries. Are you okay? He asked, his voice trembling more than he wanted. Scarlett looked at him, her eyes filled with 1,000 questions, but she spoke only one. Who are you really? Lorenzo. Lorenzo didn't answer right away. He helped Scarlett into the car while the cafe patrons were still frozen in shock over what they had just witnessed, then drove home in silence. Mia was at the neighbor Margaret's house, where Lorenzo asked her to stay whenever he needed, so the house was empty when they walked in. Scarlett went straight into the bathroom, and Lorenzo heard the water running, then her crying, the choked sobs. She tried to hide behind the sound of the shower but couldn't. He stood outside the bathroom door, his forehead resting against the cold wood, wondering what he should say, how he should explain, how much he should confess. When Scarlett came out, her eyes red and her lips still swollen from Victor's slap, she didn't look at him. She went straight to the living room, sat on the sofa, and stared down at her hands. Lorenzo followed but didn't sit. He stood by the window, keeping his distance as if afraid she would run if he came too close. The silence grew suffocating before Scarlett finally spoke. You know the name Castellano, she said, her voice frighteningly calm. You took Victor down with one move like it was something you do every day. And those men, I saw the way they looked at you. They were afraid. Ordinary mechanics don't make people afraid like that, Lorenzo. Lorenzo didn't deny it. He didn't have the strength to lie anymore, and maybe he didn't want to. I'm not a mechanic, he said at last. I mean, I am one now. But before this, I was something else. What kind of something else? I was the head of the Moretti family, Lorenzo said, and each word landed between them like a heavy stone. One of the most powerful families on the East Coast. I ran an empire worth hundreds of millions. I had hundreds of men under me. I ordered killings. I killed with my own hands. I was what people call a mafia boss, Scarlett. And Castellano, the man Victor Haynes works for, is the one who betrayed me, slaughtered nearly all my people, and has been hunting me ever since. Scarlett sat perfectly still. Lorenzo couldn't read her expression, and that frightened him more than if she had screamed or run. Victoria, my ex-wife, was the one who sold me out to Castellano, he went on, because once he had started, he couldn't stop. She was his spy from the beginning. She gave him the location of my estate, and that night Castellano attacked. 17 men died. Men who had followed me their whole lives died in front of my eyes while I ran through their bodies with Mia in my arms. And I've been hiding here for 6 months, trying to be a normal man, trying to give my daughter the life she deserves. Scarlett was still silent. Lorenzo felt like he was bleeding from wounds no one could see, spilling everything he had buried for years in front of a woman he had known less than a month. I understand if you want to leave, he said, his voice low and exhausted. I won't stop you. I'll give you money, arrange somewhere safe for you to go, somewhere Victor and Castellano can't find. You don't have to stay with someone like me. Scarlett looked up at him, and in her eyes Lorenzo didn't see fear or disgust the way he expected. He saw something else, something like understanding. How many people have you killed? She asked, her voice steady. More than I can count, Lorenzo answered honestly. Do you regret it? Some of them. Yes, Lorenzo said. Others, no. They deserved what they got. And me? Scarlett asked. Are you going to kill me too? Lorenzo stared at her as if she had asked the most absurd question in the world. I almost killed a man today because he dared to hit you, he said. Do you really think I would hurt you? I don't know what to think anymore, Scarlett replied, and her voice broke for the first time since they got home. I thought you were a kind mechanic who saved me from the rain. I thought you were a single father trying to raise his child alone. I thought you were the first person I could trust in years. And now you're telling me you're a mafia boss, a killer, a criminal. She stopped, tears streaming down her face. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know either, Lorenzo admitted. I don't know why I told you. I've never told anyone. But when I saw Victor hit you, when I thought about what he would do to you if he took you away, I lost control. And I realized I couldn't keep lying to you anymore. Why? Because I love you, Lorenzo said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. Because I fell in love with you the night you cried on the porch and told me about your brother. Because every day you've been here, I've wanted to be a better man. Because for the first time in my life, I want something other than power and money. I want you. I want this family. I want to wake up every morning and see you in the kitchen with Mia. And that scares me more than any enemy ever has. Scarlett stood up, and Lorenzo thought she was going to leave, pack her things, and walk out forever. Instead, she stepped in front of him, lifted her face to his, her eyes still wet with tears, and spoke softly, like a breath. I don't love the man you used to be, she said. I don't love a mafia boss. I don't love a killer. She raised her hand and placed it on his chest, right over his racing heart. I love the man who opened the door for me in the rain. The man who reads stories to his daughter every night. The man who sat beside me while I cried and didn't offer a single word of pity. I love the Lorenzo I've known for this past month. And if that man is real, I don't care who you used to be. Lorenzo looked at her and felt himself falling, slipping into an abyss he couldn't climb out of, and no longer wanted to. He bent down, and when his lips met hers, it felt like he had finally found his way home after a lifetime of being lost. Their first kiss tasted of tears, and the metallic tang of blood from the split on her lip. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. Realer than anything Lorenzo had ever had. When they finally pulled apart, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers and said hoarsely, I'm not good for you. I carry darkness wherever I go. And if you stay with me, that darkness will touch you. Scarlett smiled, her first smile since the cafe. I've lived in the dark my whole life, she replied. At least now I won't be standing in it alone. Victor Haynes lay in a hospital bed with his throat bruised and his voice rasping like a lifelong smoker's. The punch from the mechanic had nearly crushed his larynx, and the doctor said he was lucky to be alive. But Victor wasn't thinking about luck. He was thinking about humiliation, about being taken down in front of his men, in front of the little bitch he had been hunting for 3 weeks. And he was thinking about that man's eyes cold as ice, without hesitation, the eyes of someone who had killed so many times it had become instinct. Victor knew those eyes. He had seen them on bosses, on hitmen, on men who stood at the top of the underworld. The mechanic wasn't a mechanic. And when the man had spoken the name Castellano, Victor knew he had to report it immediately. He grabbed the phone on the bedside table and dialed the number he only dared call when something truly important happened. Romano Castellano answered on the second ring. His voice was cold and impatient as always. "This is Victor," Victor said, his words painful as knives cutting into his throat. "I have information for you. It's important." "I'm busy," Romano replied. "Speak fast. Lorenzo Moretti is alive." The silence stretched so long, Victor thought the call had dropped. Then Romano's voice came back, slower now, far more dangerous. "What did you just say?" "Lorenzo Moretti, the boss of the Moretti family. He's in Portland. I met him today. He's living as a mechanic and raising a young child. And he nearly killed me over a girl who owes money." "Are you sure?" Romano asked, his voice tight as a wire. "You know what happens if you're wrong. I'm 100% sure," Victor said. "He told me that if he ever saw my face in Portland again, he'd send my head back to you in a gift box. Ordinary mechanics don't know your name. Ordinary mechanics don't strike like assassins. That was Lorenzo Moretti. I'd bet my life on it." Silence again. Victor could hear Romano breathing. The slow, measured breathing of a man calculating, planning, preparing for a hunt. "The address," Romano said at last. "I need the exact address." Victor read out the address his men had tracked down. The small house on the outskirts of Portland, where Lorenzo was living with his daughter and that girl. Romano noted it down, then ended the call without another word. 10 minutes later, Romano Castellano stood by the window of his New York penthouse, staring out at the city at night with a glass of whiskey in his hand. Lorenzo Moretti was alive, the man he had sworn to erase, the man who had killed his son 12 years ago in a territorial war, the man he believed had died in the attack on the Moretti estate 6 months earlier. He was still alive, and not only alive, but rebuilding a life, falling in love, finding a happiness his son would never have the chance to know. Romano set the whiskey down and dialed another number. This time, a woman answered, sweet, seductive, and utterly untrustworthy. "Victoria," Romano said, "I have news for you. Your ex-husband is alive." Silence followed. Then Victoria Moretti spoke, her voice colder than Romano's. "Where?" "Portland," Romano replied. "He's living with the child and a new woman. Looks like he's forgotten you." Victoria's laughter rang through the phone, sharp as a razor. "He'll never forget me," she said. "And I want to see his face when I take away the last thing he still cares about. I want Mia." Romano smiled in the dark. That was exactly what he wanted to hear. "Then get ready," he said. "We're going to Portland." A month passed like a dream. Lorenzo barely dared to believe was real. After that night of confession, after the first kiss that tasted of tears and blood, everything between him and Scarlett shifted into something that couldn't be undone. She no longer slept on the living room sofa. She slept in his bed, in his arms, and every morning when Lorenzo woke to find her dark hair resting against his chest, he had to remind himself this was real, that he was allowed to have this, that after all the sins he had committed, the universe had still given him a second chance he didn't deserve. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't talk about Castellano or Victoria or the shadow that still lurked somewhere beyond the edges of their quiet life. They lived one day at a time, savoring each moment, like people who knew this happiness could be torn away at any second and had to be cherished down to the last breath. Scarlett didn't return to the cafe after Victor. Lorenzo wouldn't allow it, and this time she didn't argue. She stayed home with Mia, taught her to draw, cooked meals, and turned a house that had once felt cold into a real home. And Mia, a 6-year-old child who had forgotten what it felt like to have a mother, bloomed like a flower finally watered after a long drought. One Sunday afternoon, Lorenzo came home early and found Mia sitting at the dining table with her coloring set, carefully filling in a drawing while Scarlett prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Dad, come here." Mia waved him over, her eyes bright. "I drew our family." Lorenzo walked closer, and when he saw the picture, his throat tightened. 3 figures standing in front of a small house. A tall, dark-haired man, a woman with long hair holding hands with a little girl and a stuffed bear, Above them, a bright yellow sun and a line of crooked red crayon words. My family, Dad, Mama Scar, and me. This is Dad, Mia pointed at the man. Dad is always the tallest. And this is Mama Scar. She's the prettiest. And this is me with Mr. Theo. I drew our family happy, because our family is happy. Right, Dad? Lorenzo couldn't speak. He just pulled his daughter into his arms and kissed the top of her head, hiding eyes that had gone wet with something he couldn't name. Scarlett stood in the kitchen doorway watching them, and when her eyes met Lorenzo's over Mia's shoulder, they both understood they had become a real family, without papers, without vows, without anything but love and the choice to stay every day. That night, after Mia had fallen asleep with the family drawing neatly taped to her bedroom wall, Lorenzo stepped out onto the back porch to smoke. He had quit when Mia was born, but tonight he needed something to keep his hands busy, while his thoughts spun. He was happy, truly happy for the first time in his life, and that terrified him, because in his world, happiness was always a warning sign before disaster. His phone vibrated. Lorenzo glanced at the screen and saw Enzo's name. He answered. There's trouble, Enzo said immediately, his voice tight. I found people watching your house. Professional. At least 2 of them, rotating shifts. They've been there about 2 weeks. Lorenzo felt the blood in his veins turn cold. Who? I'm not sure, but their cars have New York plates. Lorenzo closed his eyes. New York. Castellano. Anything else? There is. Enzo hesitated, as if deciding whether to say it. Victoria is in Portland. She checked into a downtown hotel 2 days ago. I think she's here for you. Lorenzo said nothing. He stood there in the dark, a half-burned cigarette between his fingers, staring at the house where Scarlett and Mia slept peacefully, unaware the storm was closing in. You need to leave, Enzo said. Now, take the girl and the child and disappear before it's too late. I can arrange it. Lorenzo thought of the family drawing on Mia's wall, thought of Scarlett's smile while she cooked dinner, thought of the past month of happiness, and how close it was to being ripped apart. No, he said at last. I'm not running anymore. I've run enough. If they want to come, I'll wait. Lorenzo, Enzo said, his voice strained. This is Castellano. This is Victoria. You can't. I know, Lorenzo cut him off. But I have something to protect now, and I won't let anyone take it from me. He ended the call and looked up at the starless night sky. The storm was coming, and this time, Lorenzo wouldn't run. He would stand and fight, even if it meant becoming the monster he had tried so hard to bury. 3 days after Enzo's call, Victoria appeared. Lorenzo was at the garage when he got Scarlett's message. Just 3 words. Someone's here. He drove home at a speed that could kill, his heart slamming wildly in his chest, his mind spinning through 100 worst-case scenarios. But when he pulled up in front of the house, he didn't see Castellano's men. He didn't see guns or violence. He saw only a sleek black Mercedes parked along the curb, and a woman standing on his porch in an expensive red dress and high heels that could buy a mechanic's monthly wage. Victoria. She looked no different from the last time Lorenzo had seen her. The night she stood watching him carry Mia out the back door while Castellano's men slaughtered his crew at the front. The same flawless blonde hair, the same unmarked pale skin, the same ice-blue eyes he once thought were the most beautiful in the world, until he realized they held nothing but ambition and calculation. She turned when she heard Lorenzo's car, and a smile bloomed on her lips as if they were old friends reunited. Lorenzo, she said, her voice sweet in the way he once loved and now found nauseating. You look awful. The mechanic life doesn't suit you, does it? Lorenzo got out of the car and saw Scarlett standing in the doorway, her hand gripping the door as if ready to slam it shut at any second, her eyes fixed on Victoria with the wary intensity of a cornered animal. Where's Mia? Lorenzo asked, his voice cold as steel. In her room, Scarlett replied. I didn't let her inside. Lorenzo nodded at Scarlett, a small gesture meant to steady her, then turned back to Victoria. What do you want? Can't a mother visit her daughter? Victoria tilted her head, the false smile still in place. I'm her mother, Lorenzo. I have a right to see my child. You lost that right when you sold your family out to Castellano, Lorenzo replied, each word like a bullet. You think I don't know you gave up the estate's location. You think I don't know 17 people died that night because of you. Victoria's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. That was business, she said coolly. You know how this world works. The strong survive, the weak die. I just chose the winning side. The winning side, Lorenzo repeated, his voice dropping in a way anyone who had ever worked for him would recognize as dangerous. You call murdering my men, my friends, my family choosing the winning side. I didn't come here to argue about the past, Victoria said, her voice sharpening. "I came to tell you I want Mia. I'm going to take you to court for custody. And with your record, with who you really are, who do you think a judge will side with? A fugitive mafia boss or a mother trying to reunite with her daughter?" Lorenzo stood perfectly still, but the air around him seemed to thicken, heavier, more dangerous. Scarlett stood in the doorway and felt it, felt the shift in him like a wild animal waking inside his skin. This was no longer the Lorenzo she knew, the man who read bedtime stories, the man who held her at night and told her he loved her. This was Lorenzo Moretti, head of one of the most powerful mafia families on the East Coast, a man who climbed to the top on blood and bones. "You think you can threaten me," Lorenzo said, his voice low and even, like the hiss of a snake before it strikes. "You think you can come to my house and demand my daughter?" Victoria took a step back, and for the first time Scarlett saw fear flicker in her eyes. Still, she tried to hold her ground. "I have Romano protecting me," she said. "You can't touch me. Romano Castellano." Lorenzo spat the name as if it tasted bitter. "You're sleeping with the man who killed 17 of my people and you think he'll protect you. You know what, Victoria, Romano doesn't protect anyone. He uses people until they're worthless. Then he throws them away. You think you're special. You're just his latest whore." "I'll take Mia," Victoria snapped, her face flushed with rage and humiliation, "through the courts or some other way." "You can't stop me." Lorenzo stepped closer, each movement slow and deliberate, and Victoria retreated until her back hit the black Mercedes. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence alone, his gaze, the way he loomed like darkness given form, was enough to make her tremble. "Listen carefully," Lorenzo said, his voice so low Scarlett had to strain to hear it. "If you touch Mia, if you come anywhere near her, if I see your face anywhere close to my daughter again, I will kill you. I won't be quick. I won't be kind. I'll make you beg for death before I finish. And don't think Romano can save you. When I'm done with him, there won't be anything left to save." "You wouldn't dare," Victoria whispered, but her voice shook. "You know who I am," Lorenzo replied. "You know what I've done. Do you really want to find out whether I dare?" Victoria stood there for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for mercy, for weakness she could exploit. She found none. Only darkness. Only death. She turned, opened the car door, and before getting in, looked back at him one last time. "This isn't over," she said. "Romano is coming, and when he does, you'll regret not surrendering while you had the chance." The Mercedes roared away, leaving Lorenzo alone in the street, his fists clenched, and his fury still burning hot in his veins. He stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, forcing the monster back into its cage before turning toward the house. But when he stepped onto the porch, Scarlett was still in the doorway, and the way she looked at him made his heart tighten. Not fear, not disgust, pain. Pain from seeing the darkest part of him, the part he had tried to hide, and not knowing what to do with it. "Lorenzo," she said softly, barely more than a breath. "Would you really kill her?" Lorenzo looked at her and didn't lie. "If she touches Mia," he said, "then yes. I'll kill her without blinking." Scarlett said nothing. She just nodded, as if she understood, as if she accepted it, then stepped aside to let him in. And as Lorenzo passed her, she took his hand and squeezed gently. Not forgiveness, not approval, just presence. She was still here. No matter who he was, she was still here. 2 days after the confrontation with Victoria, Lorenzo made the biggest mistake of his life. He let Scarlett pick Mia up from school alone, not because he was careless. He had Enzo watching from a distance, had checked every route, had made sure there were no suspicious signs within a 2-mile radius of the school. But he forgot one thing. Castellano didn't become the most powerful boss on the East Coast by acting foolishly. He waited. He watched. He found the gaps in the defenses and struck when no one expected it. Scarlett arrived at the school at 3 in the afternoon like every other day. Mia ran into her arms with a bright smile and endless chatter about the drawing she had just finished. "Mama Scar, I drew a dolphin. The teacher said mine was the best in class. When we get home, I'll show Dad. Okay." Scarlett smiled and took Mia's hand, leading her toward the car parked 200 meters from the school gate. She didn't notice the black SUV parked on the corner, didn't notice the 2 men inside watching her every step, didn't realize Enzo had already been knocked out and stuffed into the trunk of his own car 3 blocks away. Everything happened too fast. Scarlett had just opened the car door for Mia when the black SUV surged forward and screeched to a stop beside them. Doors flew open, 3 men jumped out, and before Scarlett could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Mia. That was the only thought in Scarlett's mind. Not fear for herself. Not the survival instinct screaming at her to run. Only Mia. The 6-year-old stood frozen by the car door, eyes wide with terror, mouth open but unable to form a sound. Scarlett bit down on the hand covering her mouth, biting hard enough to taste blood. And when the man released her in pain, she lunged for Mia and wrapped her in her arms. "Run, sweetheart," she screamed. "Run back into the school and find your teacher. Go." But Mia didn't run. She was too scared to move, her small legs rooted to the ground, and in that split second of hesitation, Castellano's men were already there. One grabbed Scarlett by the hair and yanked her back. Another tore Mia from her arms. And Scarlett did something she never thought she could do. She fought. She punched. She scratched. She bit. She screamed like a wild animal protecting its young. She didn't know how to fight. Wasn't trained. Had no weapon but her nails and desperation. But she didn't stop. Because Mia was crying. Because the child was calling her name. Because Scarlett had promised Lorenzo she would protect that little girl with her life. "This bitch is crazy," one man snarled as Scarlett clawed his face. "Shut her up." The first punch slammed into Scarlett's stomach, doubling her over and stealing her breath. The second hit her face, and she felt blood pour from her nose. The third, the fourth, the fifth. She fell to the ground but still crawled toward Mia, still reached out as if she could shield her even as her body gave out. "Mama Scar," Mia screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Don't hit Mama Scar. Stop, please. Don't hit Mama Scar." Mia's cries stabbed into Scarlett's heart. She tried to push herself up one more time, but her legs buckled and she could only lie there watching as the men lifted Mia and shoved her into the SUV. "No," Scarlett sobbed, her voice reduced to a broken whisper from pain. "No, don't take her. I'll do anything. Just don't touch her." One of the men sneered, then grabbed Scarlett by the hair and dragged her to her feet. "You're coming too," he said. "The boss wants both of you." They threw Scarlett into the car like a sack of trash. She hit the floor, pain exploding through her body, but she immediately crawled to where Mia sat, curled in the corner, wrapped her arms around her, and covered her with her own body. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," she whispered into Mia's ear, her voice shaking but forcing calm so the child wouldn't be more afraid. "Don't look at anything. Just close your eyes and think about Dad. He'll come for us. Dad always comes." Mia buried her face in Scarlett's chest and sobbed, her tiny hands clutching Scarlett's shirt, as if afraid she would be torn away at any moment. And Scarlett held her, even though every breath felt like a knife, even though blood still ran from her nose and lip. She held Mia and whispered reassurances she didn't know would come true. The SUV drove for about 20 minutes before stopping. They were dragged out and shoved into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, Victoria was waiting, and when she saw Mia, she smiled as if she had just received a birthday gift. "Mommy's little girl is here," Victoria said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Mommy missed you so much." Mia stepped back, hiding behind Scarlett, and for the first time since being taken, she spoke. "You're not my mom," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Mama Scar is my mom." Victoria's face twisted with rage. She stepped forward and without hesitation slapped Mia, not as hard as the men had beaten Scarlett, but hard enough to leave a red mark on the cheek of a 6-year-old child. Scarlett saw red. She lunged at Victoria, not caring how badly she was hurt, not caring how many enemies surrounded her. She only knew someone had just struck the child she loved as her own. She was stopped instantly. 2 men pinned her arms while a third punched her in the stomach again. Scarlett collapsed, vomiting blood. "Lock them up," Victoria ordered, "and send word to Lorenzo. Tell him if he wants to see his daughter alive, he comes here, alone." As the men dragged Scarlett and Mia into a small room and locked the door, a message was sent from Scarlett's phone to Lorenzo's number. "Old warehouse at Dock 12. Alone, or watch them die." And at a garage 15 miles away, Lorenzo stared at the message on his screen, and his world shattered. Lorenzo stood in the middle of the garage, staring at the phone screen, and in that instant everything stopped. Sound vanished. Time froze. There were only the words on the screen, dancing before his eyes like a curse. "Old warehouse at Dock 12. Alone, or watch them die. Mia. Scarlett." They had Mia and Scarlett. The phone slipped from Lorenzo's hand and clattered against the concrete floor. He stood there, unmoving, not breathing, while the other mechanics in the garage looked at him with unease and didn't dare speak. Then the rage came. Not slowly, not like a flame sparked from a single ember, but like a volcano erupting, like a dam shattering and releasing an ocean. Something primal and horrific bursting beyond control. Lorenzo roared. A sound not human but animal, the cry of a beast driven into a corner, and he drove his fist into the brick wall beside him. Once, twice, 3 times. Blood sprayed from his knuckles, but he felt no pain. He felt nothing but the fury burning him alive from the inside. The garage owner rushed over, trying to say something, but Lorenzo looked at him with eyes the man hadn't seen in 6 months. The eyes of a killer. The man stepped back and said nothing. Lorenzo picked up the phone and called Enzo. He didn't know if Enzo was still alive. Didn't know what had happened. Only knew he needed his people now. Enzo answered on the first ring, his voice tight with pain and anger. "I'm sorry," Enzo said immediately. "They hit me from behind. I didn't have time to react. By the time I came to, it was too late. Lorenzo, I'm sorry." Lorenzo didn't address the apology. There was no time for it. "Mobilize everyone who's still loyal," he said, his voice cold as steel and solid as stone. "I don't care where they are or what they're doing. Call them back to Portland tonight." "What about you?" Enzo asked. "I'm going to the warehouse." "Alone?" "Lorenzo, that's Castellano. That's an army. You can't." "I'm not going to fight," Lorenzo cut in. "I'm going to stall, to make sure Mia and Scarlett stay alive until our people arrive." He ended the call and walked out of the garage, leaving wreckage and fearful stares behind. He drove home at a reckless speed, ignoring red lights and limits. When he arrived, he went straight to the bedroom, dragged the standing wardrobe aside, and opened the false floor panel behind it. Beneath lay the arsenal he had hidden from his first day in Portland: 2 pistols, a shotgun, knives, a bulletproof vest, and the black suit he had sworn he would never wear again. Lorenzo stripped off the grease-stained mechanic's clothes, the disguise he had lived in for 6 months, and put on the suit. He stood before the mirror and looked at his reflection. No longer Ryan the mechanic, the gentle single father with a quiet, ordinary life. The man staring back was Lorenzo Moretti, the head of the Moretti family. The man who built an empire on the bones of hundreds. The man even the coldest criminals wouldn't dare meet eye to eye. He had tried to run from that man, tried to bury the monster inside, tried to become better for Mia, for Scarlett, for the family he believed he could build. But the world wouldn't allow it. Castellano wouldn't allow it. Victoria wouldn't allow it. And if they wanted the monster, Lorenzo would show them what a real monster looked like. He slid the gun into his waistband, strapped the armor beneath the suit, and stepped out of the house. Before getting into the car, he stopped and looked at the drawing Mia had taped to the kitchen window. 3 figures. My family. Dad, Mama Scar, and me. I'm bringing them home, Lorenzo whispered to himself. Even if I have to kill every last person who stands in my way, I'm bringing them home. He got into the car and drove into the darkness, leaving behind the man he had tried to become and stepping fully into the man he had been born to be. The abandoned warehouse at Dock 12 lay silent in the darkness like a sleeping beast. Lorenzo parked his car 100 meters away and walked forward without a sound, his leather shoes making no noise on the cracked concrete. He knew they were watching. He knew guns were trained on him from the shadows. He knew he was walking into a tiger's den with empty hands. But he didn't stop, because somewhere inside that warehouse, Mia and Scarlett were waiting for him. The steel door slid open before Lorenzo could touch it, and 2 large men stepped out, guns aimed straight at his chest. "Weapons," one of them said. Lorenzo slowly removed the 2 pistols from his waistband and set them on the ground. He knew they wouldn't let him in if he was armed, and he also knew that with Castellano's numbers here, guns wouldn't help if he tried to use force. His plan was to stall, to keep Mia and Scarlett alive until Enzo arrived with reinforcements. They searched him, took the knife hidden in his boot and the small gun strapped to his ankle, then shoved him inside. The warehouse was vast and empty, lit by only a few flickering industrial bulbs that cast deep black shadows in the corners. Lorenzo counted at least 15 of Castellano's men scattered throughout, all armed, all watching him with the eyes of men ready to kill on command. And in the center of the warehouse, Romano Castellano waited. He was older than Lorenzo remembered. His hair was white, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes were still as sharp and cold as they had been 12 years ago, the night everything between their families turned to blood. Beside Romano stood Victoria in a black dress, as if attending a funeral, the victorious smile on her lips making Lorenzo want to crush her throat where she stood. And in the corner of the room, Scarlett and Mia were tied to metal chairs. When Lorenzo saw them, his heart felt like it was being crushed. Mia was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't dare make a sound. Scarlett's face was beaten beyond recognition. Dried blood caked on her lips and nose, one eye swollen shut, yet she was still leaning toward Mia, as if trying to shield her even while bound. When Scarlett saw Lorenzo, she cried, not from fear for herself, but from relief that he was alive. and from pain knowing he had come here, walked into this trap for her and for Mia. "Lorenzo," Romano said, his voice slow and deliberate, like a snake savoring its prey. "Long time no see. I thought you were dead." Lorenzo didn't look at Romano. He kept his eyes on Scarlett and Mia, trying to send them a message that everything would be all right, that he would get them out, even though he didn't know how. "Let them go," he said at last, turning to face Romano. "This is between you and me. They have nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it." Romano laughed, the cold sound echoing through the empty warehouse. "Your daughter has nothing to do with it. The woman you love has nothing to do with it. Do you think I'm that stupid, Lorenzo? I know how to hurt you. I know you're not afraid of death. You're afraid of losing them, and I'm going to take away the thing you fear losing most." Lorenzo clenched his fists but kept his face calm. He couldn't let Romano see the panic burning inside him, couldn't give his enemy even a sliver of psychological advantage. "What do you want?" he asked. "Money. Territory. We can negotiate." "I want you dead," Romano replied, all pretense gone, leaving only pure hatred. "But before that, I want you to suffer. I want you to watch the people you love die in front of you. I want you to feel what I felt 12 years ago when you killed my son." Lorenzo understood immediately. Marco Castellano. That was his name. Romano's 23-year-old son. The man who had led the attack on Moretti territory 12 years earlier. The man who had killed 6 of Lorenzo's people before Lorenzo personally ended him with a bullet to the head. "Marco died because he attacked me first," Lorenzo said. "He killed my men. I retaliated. That's the law of this world. Law." Romano spat onto the floor. "You lecture me about law. You killed my only son, and you call it law. 12 years, Lorenzo. 12 years I waited for this moment. 12 years I planned to destroy you, and now, at last, I have everything I want." Victoria stepped forward to stand beside Romano and spoke in a falsely sweet voice. "I told you, Lorenzo. You should have surrendered when you had the chance. Now it's too late." "Shut up!" Lorenzo roared, letting his rage show for the first time. "You're a traitor. You sold out your own family. You don't have the right to speak to me." Victoria shrugged, unaffected by his fury. "I just chose the winning side. And I'll take Mia back. After you're dead, I'll raise her as my child in Romano's. She'll forget you. Forget that woman. She'll grow up in the Castellano family and never know you existed." "No," Mia's voice rang out from the corner, small but filled with a courage that surpassed anyone else in the room. "I don't want to be with you. I want to be with Daddy. I want to be with Mama Scar." Romano signaled to one of his men, who stepped toward Scarlett, drew his gun, and pressed it to her head. Scarlett didn't scream. She closed her eyes and whispered something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps Lorenzo's name. Lorenzo saw it, and in that instant knew he would do anything, sacrifice anything, to save her and Mia. "Wait," he said, his voice breaking, no longer cold but desperate. "Wait, I'll do whatever you want. Kill me, torture me, I don't care. But let them go, please." Romano looked at him with the satisfaction of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. Lorenzo Moretti begging, kneeling before his enemy for a woman and a child. This was exactly what he had wanted to see. "No," Romano said. "You'll watch them die first. Then you get to die." And he signaled for the man to load the gun. The first gunshot didn't come from inside the warehouse. It came from outside, from the darkness where Enzo and the last loyal men of the Moretti family had quietly surrounded the place without anyone noticing. The north window shattered. A smoke grenade rolled across the concrete floor and detonated, flooding the warehouse with thick white haze within seconds. Then hell erupted. Castellano's men opened fire wildly into the smoke, but Enzo's people were better trained, more precise, and they were fighting for the boss they had stayed loyal to their entire lives. Lorenzo didn't waste a single second. In the first instant of chaos, he lunged toward the man aiming a gun at Scarlett and dropped him with a strike to the throat before he could pull the trigger. The gun hit the floor and Lorenzo grabbed it, shooting another man who was running toward Mia. "Dad!" Mia screamed, her voice swallowed by gunfire and shouting. "Daddy!" Lorenzo ran to his daughter, gripping the gun, while his eyes scanned the warehouse for threats. He cut Mia's restraints first, then Scarlett's, and when the ropes fell away, Scarlett collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with pain but still trying to stand. "You came," Scarlett whispered, tears mixing with blood on her face. "I knew you would. I'll always come," Lorenzo said, then pushed Scarlett and Mia behind a stack of wooden crates. "Stay here. Don't come out until I get back." Then he turned and went back into the fight. Lorenzo Moretti didn't fight like a man trying to survive. He fought like death itself come to collect. Every bullet he fired found its mark. Every punch and every kick carried the force of the rage he had kept buried for 6 months. Castellano's men fell one by one, and those still standing began to retreat, began to fear the man they believed had died long ago. Enzo appeared beside Lorenzo, blood pouring from a shoulder wound, still fighting like a demon. "Where are Scarlett and Mia?" he shouted over the gunfire. "Safe," Lorenzo answered. "Find Romano." Romano was no longer where he had been. In the chaos, he had vanished into the shadows. And Lorenzo knew his greatest enemy wouldn't give up so easily. He scanned the warehouse, searching for the familiar figure, and then he saw him. Romano was moving toward the crates where Scarlett and Mia were hiding, gun in hand, eyes red with hatred. "If I can't have what I want," Romano roared, his voice breaking with madness, "then you won't either." Lorenzo ran. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. Faster than the night he carried Mia out of the burning estate. Faster than when he was young and believed himself invincible. He slammed into Romano from behind just as the man raised his gun, and they crashed to the floor in a collision of bone and flesh. The gun flew from Romano's hand, skidding across the concrete and stopping several meters away. Lorenzo punched Romano in the face. Once, twice, 3 times. Blood sprayed from Romano's nose and mouth, but Lorenzo didn't stop. He punched for the night the estate was attacked. He punched for the 17 men who died. He punched for 6 months of living in fear. He punched for what they did to Scarlett. He punched for Mia's screams he would never forget. Romano collapsed, no longer able to resist, and Lorenzo grabbed the gun, pressing it to the man's head. This was the moment to end everything. 1 bullet, and Romano Castellano would never be a threat again. His family would be safe. He could start over, truly start over, with no one chasing him, no ghosts of the past. Lorenzo's finger tightened on the trigger. "Daddy?" Mia's voice came from behind him, small and trembling. "Daddy?" Lorenzo turned and saw his daughter staring at him from behind the crates. Her eyes were wide with fear, but not fear of Romano. Fear of him. Fear of the father kneeling on the floor with a gun in his hand and a face twisted by hatred. Fear of the monster he was becoming in front of her. Lorenzo looked into his daughter's eyes and saw himself reflected there. A killer, a beast, a darkness Mia would never forget if he pulled the trigger. He thought of Scarlett, of what she said that night, that she loved the man he was trying to become. And he thought of the man he wanted to be, not a killer, not a mafia boss, but Mia's father, Scarlett's partner, a man worthy of the love they had given him. Lorenzo lowered the gun. He stood, stepped back from Romano, groaning on the floor, and turned toward his daughter. "Enzo," he called, his voice exhausted but calm. "Call the FBI. Hand him over to them. Hand all of them over." Enzo looked at him in shock but didn't question it. He nodded and pulled out his phone. Lorenzo walked to Mia and knelt in front of her. She was crying hard, tears streaming down her face. But when she saw him, she threw herself into his arms and clung to him as if afraid he would disappear. "I'm sorry," Lorenzo whispered into her hair, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry you had to see this. I'm sorry you were scared. I'm sorry." "I'm not scared of you," Mia whispered back. "I was scared you'd become a bad man. But you're not bad. You didn't kill him. You're a good man." Lorenzo held his daughter tighter and closed his eyes, feeling her light weight in his arms, feeling her small heart pounding with fear yet still trusting him. And he swore to himself, swore to Mia, swore to Scarlett being helped by Enzo at the far end of the warehouse, that he would never let them see that monster again. The ambulances arrived 15 minutes after the last gunshot fell silent. The FBI arrived at the same time, and Nathan Cross, the agent who had tracked both the Moretti and Castellano families for years, personally entered the warehouse with his team. Lorenzo didn't care about any of them. He didn't care about Romano being dragged away in handcuffs, didn't care about Victoria screaming for a lawyer, didn't care about the bodies scattered across the floor. He only cared about Scarlett, being lifted onto a stretcher by paramedics, her face so pale it was almost translucent, her eyes closed tight, her breathing so faint that Lorenzo had to lean close just to hear it. "Her condition is critical," one medic told him, as they rushed the stretcher toward the ambulance. "Head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. We need to move her now." Lorenzo wanted to go with her, wanted to stay by her side, but Mia was clinging to his neck and wouldn't let go. She had cried until there were no tears left, only dry sobs and a body that wouldn't stop trembling. He couldn't leave his daughter alone, couldn't let her face another moment of fear. Enzo stepped up beside him, one hand still pressed to his injured shoulder, his eyes steady. "I'll ride with the ambulance," he said. "You stay with the kid. I'll call you as soon as there's news." Lorenzo nodded, and that was all he could do. He carried Mia out of the warehouse and didn't look back at the wreckage of the past he was leaving behind. That night, Lorenzo sat in the hospital waiting room with Mia asleep on his lap, and he waited. He waited while doctors operated on Scarlett for 6 hours. He waited while they said she was out of immediate danger, but still unconscious. He waited as night turned into day, and day turned back into night. 3 days. 3 days, Lorenzo didn't leave the hospital. 3 days he sat by Scarlett's bed, holding her hand, looking at her bruised face, and promising himself he would never let anyone hurt her like that again. Mia stayed with him the entire time, only leaving when Mrs. Margaret came to take her to eat and wash up, then returning right after. She drew pictures for Mama's scar, bright pictures full of suns and rainbows and flowers, taping them to the hospital wall as if they could help wake her. Lorenzo didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment a gun was pressed to Scarlett's head, heard her cry when she saw him, felt the crushing helplessness of being unable to protect the woman he loved. He grew gaunt, his beard rough from days without shaving, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. But he didn't leave. On the morning of the 4th day, as Lorenzo sat beside the bed holding Scarlett's hand like always, he felt her fingers twitch. His heart stopped for a beat. He looked up and saw Scarlett's eyes fluttering, struggling to open in the soft hospital light. "Scarlett," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened fully, and the first thing she saw was Lorenzo's face, inches from hers, drawn and exhausted, and the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Mia," she said, the first word rasping from her throat. "Where's Mia?" "She's safe," Lorenzo said, and he cried. For the first time in many years, Lorenzo Moretti cried in front of another person. "She's safe because of you. You protected her. You did." He couldn't say anything else. He lowered his forehead to Scarlett's and let his tears fall onto her pillow. Scarlett lifted her hand, weak but steady enough to touch his cheek, to wipe away his tears. "I know who you are now," she whispered. "I read the news. They talked about you, about the Moretti family, about everything." Lorenzo stiffened. He had known this moment would come, known she would learn the full truth, not just the fragments he had shared, but he hadn't been ready for it to happen now. When she had just woken up, when she was still weak and hurting, and shouldn't have had to face anything except healing. "Scarlett," he began, but she placed a finger against his lips. "I don't care," she said, and her voice, though faint, was firm and clear. "I don't care who you were. I don't care what you've done. I only care about who you choose to be now. And the man who sat by my bed for 3 days, the man who cried for me, the man who chose not to kill his enemy in front of his daughter, that's the man I love. That's the man I want beside me." Lorenzo looked at her and felt himself falling, slipping into her warm brown eyes, into the love she was offering him, even though he didn't deserve it. "I don't deserve you," he said, his voice breaking. "Nobody deserves love," Scarlett replied, smiling for the first time even though it made her wince with pain. "That's why it's a gift, and I'm giving it to you. Do you want to accept it?" Lorenzo bent down and kissed her, gently, as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and when their lips met, he knew that no matter what the future brought, he would never let her go again. 2 weeks after Scarlett woke up, Agent Nathan Cross came to the hospital to see Lorenzo. He didn't arrive with handcuffs or an arrest warrant, but with an offer. The FBI had been tracking the Castellano family for years, but never had enough evidence to bring them down. What happened at the warehouse, combined with Lorenzo's testimony about the operations of both families, could finally close the biggest case of Cross's career. In return, Lorenzo and his family would enter witness protection, new identities, a new life. Every crime from his past would be erased. Lorenzo didn't need much time to think. He was ready to give up everything an empire already in ruins. The name Moretti soaked in too much blood and grief in exchange for one real chance to start over with Scarlett and Mia. He signed the agreement right there in Scarlett's hospital room, her hand wrapped around his while Mia sat on the bed coloring, as if nothing in the world mattered more than choosing the right shade of blue. The trial of Romano Castellano and Victoria Moretti took place 3 months later. Lorenzo didn't testify in person. His statements had been recorded and sealed, but he followed the news from afar, watching with the quiet attention of someone who needed to know the past was truly over. Romano was sentenced to life in prison without parole on multiple counts, including murder, drug trafficking, money laundering, and kidnapping. He was sent to a maximum security federal prison, where he would rot until the end of his life. Victoria received 25 years for conspiracy, kidnapping, and child abuse. She screamed and sobbed as she was led out of the courtroom, but no one pitied her. The court also permanently terminated her parental rights, meaning she would never be allowed to approach Mia again, directly or indirectly. When Lorenzo read that part, a massive weight lifted from his chest, not joy at someone else's suffering, but relief pure and overwhelming that his daughter was finally safe. Victor Haynes was arrested in the large-scale sweep that followed the warehouse incident. He was sentenced to 15 years for loan sharking, human trafficking, and assault. The $150,000 of debt Scarlett had carried like chains for years was officially erased, because the lender had lost all legal claim once convicted. Scarlett cried when she heard, not from sadness, but because for the first time in her life, she was truly free. Free from debt, free from the past, free to begin again. 6 months later, they were living in Seattle under new identities. Lorenzo was no longer Lorenzo Moretti. He was Ryan Cole, a mechanic at a small garage on the edge of the city. Scarlett was Sarah Cole, his wife, a part-time art instructor at the local community center. Mia remained Mia. They didn't want to take away the name she'd had since birth, only changing her last name to Cole to match her new family. Their house in Seattle wasn't much bigger than the one in Portland. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a modest backyard with a white wooden fence Mia loved to draw on whenever the weather was nice. But it was their home, truly their home. Not a hiding place, not a cover, a place they belonged. Lorenzo Ryan, as he reminded himself to think now, woke up every morning beside Scarlett and still couldn't believe this life was real. He went to work at the garage, fixed cars, talked to customers about the weather and football, like any ordinary man. He picked Mia up from school every afternoon and listened to her stories about new friends, a kind teacher, the drawing she got an A on. He came home to the smell of Scarlett's cooking drifting through the doorway, and every time, he had to pause for a moment to remind himself this wasn't a dream. Scarlett finished the art degree she'd abandoned years earlier, and when she held her diploma at graduation with Lorenzo and Mia in the front row applauding, she cried with happiness. She opened a small art class for neighborhood children, and every child who walked into her classroom reminded her of Jamie, of her brother, of the dream she thought had died with him. She still remembered Jamie every day, still lit a candle on his birthday, but the pain no longer consumed her. It became part of her, like a healed scar still there, but no longer bleeding. Mia was in 2nd grade, and the top student in art, which surprised no one. She no longer had nightmares about the warehouse at night, thanks to the child therapist they'd taken her to see during their first 3 months in Seattle. She called Scarlett Mama now, not Mama Scar anymore. Just Mama, as if she'd never had anyone else. And when someone asked about her biological mother, Mia just shrugged and said she didn't have one. She only had Mama and Dad, and that was all she needed. Late at night, when Mia was asleep and the house was quiet, Lorenzo still woke sometimes from nightmares, still startled at unfamiliar sounds, still had to remind himself no one was chasing him anymore, no one wanted him dead, that he was safe. And every time, Scarlett was there, holding him in the dark, whispering that she was here, that they were okay, that they had each other. And Lorenzo believed her. He believed her because she'd never lied to him. He believed her because she stayed even after knowing who he was. He believed her because her love was the realest thing he'd ever had in his life. Exactly 1 year after the fateful rainy night when Lorenzo opened the door for Scarlett, he knelt in front of her in the living room of their small house in Seattle. Mia stood beside him, holding a red velvet box with the ring he had saved for over 6 months to buy, her eyes sparkling with the effort it had taken to keep this secret. Scarlett stood there with one hand covering her mouth, tears already falling even though he hadn't said a single word yet. And Lorenzo, the man who had once been the most powerful mafia boss on the East Coast, the man whose hands had spilled more blood than he could ever count, was trembling like a boy confessing his love for the first time. "I can't promise you an easy life," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't promise the past won't ever come back to haunt us. I can't promise I'll be perfect, because I know I'm not perfect and never will be. But I promise you this. I'll choose you every single day. I'll fight for this family every single day. I'll try to become the man you and Mia deserve, every single day." He looked up, his dark eyes meeting her brown eyes filled with tears. "Scarlett Hayes, will you be my wife?" Scarlett didn't answer with words. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, a deep and lingering kiss filled with everything she couldn't put into language. And when they finally pulled apart, she whispered through her tears, "I've belonged to you since the moment you opened that door." They married in March, in the backyard of their small home, with only the people who mattered most present. Enzo stood as best man, the wound on his shoulder healed, having officially left the underworld behind to open a small repair shop in Portland. Margaret, the kind neighbor who had watched over Mia during the hardest days, sat in the front row and cried through the entire ceremony. Mia was the flower girl in a pink dress she chose herself, and when it was her turn to speak, her Her clear voice carried across the garden. "I love Dad. I love Mama. And I'm happy we're a real family now." There wasn't a dry eye left after that. Lorenzo kissed his bride beneath the arch of flowers they had made with their own hands. And as their lips met, he thought about the long road that had brought them here. The rainy night in November, the soaked girl knocking on his door, all the pain and fear and loss they had endured, and he knew he would do it all again. Suffer it all again. If it meant standing here, kissing this woman, calling her his wife. 3 years later, Lorenzo stood by the living room window, looking out at the garden where Scarlett was playing with 2 children. Mia, now 9 years old, was teaching her little brother how to draw butterflies on paper. She had grown into a bright and talented young girl, with her father's eyes and her mother's heart. The 2-year-old boy sitting beside her, with Scarlett's brown eyes and Lorenzo's black hair, was Ethan Cole, the son they had welcomed on a star-filled summer night 2 years earlier. Scarlett had given him the middle name, Jamie, after her late brother, so a part of Jamie would always live on in their family. Lorenzo watched his wife smile at their children, watched Mia hug her little brother and show him how to hold a crayon, and felt something he didn't have words for. It wasn't just happiness, though that was part of it. It wasn't just peace, though that was part of it too. It was wholeness, the sense that his life, after all the years of blood and suffering, finally meant something. Scarlett looked up and caught him standing at the window. She smiled, the smile he had loved from the very first moment he saw it, and waved him outside. Lorenzo stepped into the garden, sat beside his wife, and pulled her into his arms while Mia and Ethan kept drawing. "What are you thinking about?" Scarlett asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm thinking about that rainy night," Lorenzo replied. "The night you knocked on my door. What if you hadn't opened it?" she asked softly. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then he said gently, "Then I wouldn't have any of this. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have Ethan. I wouldn't know what real happiness is." He kissed her hair. "I opened that door not because I was a good man. I opened it because in that moment, I remembered I once wanted to be one, and you gave me a reason to try again." Scarlett looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Some doors shouldn't be opened," she said. "And some doors, if you don't open them, you lose everything worth living for." They sat there in the afternoon sun, watching their children play, and Lorenzo thought about all the doors he had opened in his life. Doors that led to darkness, doors that led to blood and tears. And the last door, the most important door, the door he opened for a stranger on a rainy night, had led him here, to family, to love, to a life he never dared to dream of. Their story wasn't perfect. It was filled with scars and tears and sleepless nights haunted by nightmares. But it was theirs. And for Lorenzo, that was all that mattered. He had opened a door without knowing what it would bring, and it gave him everything he never dared to want. A family, a love, a reason to become better. This is the story of Lorenzo and Scarlett, the story of 2 broken people who found each other in the darkness and walked into the light together. The story of a fateful door and what waits on the other side if we are brave enough to open it. And maybe that is the lesson this story wants to leave with all of us. That in life, sometimes the smallest moments create the greatest changes. A kind act toward a stranger. A door opened on a rainy night. A choice to help someone even when there's nothing in it for you. Those small things can change your life and someone else's in ways you could never imagine. The second lesson is about forgiveness and second chances. Lorenzo was once a killer, a mafia boss, a man who caused immense pain to others. But he chose to change. He chose to become better because of love. And Scarlett, knowing his dark past, chose to see the man he was trying to become instead of the man he had been. That is the power of forgiveness. That is the meaning of a second chance. None of us are perfect. We all have a past, mistakes, regrets. But the past doesn't define us. What defines us is what we choose to do from this moment on. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Lorenzo or Scarlett, if you believe in love and redemption and second chances, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss future emotional stories. Like and share this video so more people can hear this story. We would truly love to know how you felt after listening. Have you ever opened a fateful door in your life? Do you believe in second chances? Did this story remind you of someone in your real life? Leave a comment below and share with us. We read every comment and deeply value hearing what's in your hearts. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We wish all of you watching good health, a life filled with joy and happiness every day, and may you always find doors worth opening in your own life. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.